Hello, hello. Hi, my tribe, my Wholist Hammerstedt Health and Wellness tribe. It's me, Heather Hammerstedt, hence the name. I wanted to come on today and talk about the Mindset Week that we have going on. I know Facebook is a little bit glitchy today, so hopefully everybody can see. All week this week, I'm doing mindset work, and next week, and everything is going to build on itself. And so I wanted to come on and talk a little bit about a summary of all the posts that are going up this week in case you miss any of them. And then next week I'll be back and talk about kind of cognitive behavioral therapy and how we can use that for ourselves. Again, I'm Heather Hammerstedt. I'm an emergency physician, lifestyle medicine physician, and CEO and founder of Wholist, which is a lifestyle medicine coaching and consulting company. I love to talk about mindset work around lifestyle change, and I get super nerdy about it. So I'm currently in Sun Valley with some friends. I live in Idaho. We're over here for the 4th of July. I hope everyone else is having a great time as well. So all this week on social media, it's Mindset Week again, we're going to be talking about neuroplasticity, about self-capacity and self-efficacy, about self-compassion, mindfulness, and what addiction really is. Next week, we're going to dig into metacognition and tools to use for yourself. And why is this really important? It's important because you cannot make valued change for yourself, regardless of what it is, whether it's around food or exercise like we talk about, or whether it's about relationships or about work or what it is, without doing this work on yourself and really understanding. So we're going to be talking about it all week, Instagram and Facebook at Wholist Health. So come on over there, drop questions into any of the public, this group's posts for questions and answers and conversation. But for now, since we're here, let's talk about it. So did you know that we create 700 new neurons a day? So think of the freedom of that. It means that you have the opportunity to shift the way your brain is working and is wired. So think about it this way. The thoughts that you have are basically pre-wired automatic reactions to the external circumstances around you. So think about that. They're basically automatic reactions to the external circumstances that are around you. So these thoughts, I call them, are autocorrects, right? Like your phone does. So they're based on the experiences you've had in the past, with the circumstances in the past, your reactions to them in the past, and the outcomes you've experienced in the past. So how have your autocorrects been on your phone? Are they always right? No, they can get you in trouble, right? So this is the same thing as what your thoughts are. So what if you could change the thoughts that you have now, create a new result from that circumstance, and the next time the autocorrect thought was entirely new? You see how those kind of thought train tracks would be relayed for you to create better thoughts and feelings and actions and results? We're going to really get into that next week. We can rewire our brain patterns to create more productive ones for the future. So this is basically neuroplasticity. So to be clear, this isn't classic lifestyle medicine, right? This is me waxing prolific and being super nerdy about how we basically do our own neurosurgery to our thought train tracks, right? By creating new autocorrects to rely on in the future and create new thought patterns to get the results that you want. So it's basically like doing your own cognitive behavioral therapy. And I mean, you can use this all of the time on everything: work, relationships, food, exercise, parenting, whatever. And that's why this is relevant, because in reality, the reason why you haven't been able to successfully create new sustainable habits and haven't gotten the results that you wanted is because you were following the autocorrect that your brain thinks it should be following, right? So change it up. The choice is yours to act on, but you have to be the one to do this. So let's move on to self-compassion, right? Why is this important? So I spent a day lecturing on imposter syndrome and self-capacity last weekend, and so I was thinking about this a lot. I also had like some really great breakthroughs with some of our coaching clients. We all know what compassion means, at least we think we do, right? You have an animal that's injured, or a neighbor who's ill, or a friend who lost a husband. But do we know how to share that compassion with ourselves? So trusting yourself and loving yourself to see your true value and treating yourself with the same compassion that you would others is really the first step to self-realization of your own capacity and your own worth. And you have to have that to be able to take the steps that you need and deserve to be your whole healthy you, whether that's food, exercise, addiction, sleep, work, any of that, relationships, whatever it is that you're putting on the back burner. So there's 3 components to self-compassion. There's self-kindness instead of self-judgment. There's understanding there's a community, a common humanity versus isolation, and it's mindfulness over identification. So we're going to talk more about mindfulness coming up. So instead of mercilessly judging and criticizing yourself for your perceived shortcomings, self-compassion means that you are kind and understand when you're confronted with your own personal failings. I mean, whoever said you were supposed to be perfect, right? So self-compassion kind of leads us into self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is basically your belief in your innate ability to achieve a goal. So it's a big part of why some individuals can cope when they're faced with obstacles or stumbles, as I like to call them. And they exert sufficient effort and get success. With some people who have some low self-efficacy are likely to cease kind of trying, and they'll do that too early, and so they'll fail, right? So by determining the beliefs that you hold with your own power to affect situations, you can influence both the power that you have to face your own challenges and the choices that you're likely to make. So these are really interesting. This is really interesting when you think about this self-efficacy in health. So basically thinking of change, making plans, implementing plans, and dealing with those stumbles are all based on self-efficacy. So it's a combination of your own self-confidence and your understanding about what you're able to implement. And why this is so amazing is because if you believe you can do it, you can do it. This is why this week in my blog, we talked about those autocorrect thoughts and rewiring neurons for ourselves. We talked about self-compassion, and we've got more, coming up. So self-compassion leads into self-efficacy. And when I talked about self-compassion, we talked about mindfulness. And I've done lives and lots of conversations with you guys about this before, but let's talk about it again because it's so important. So what is mindfulness? Does it mean you have to be the Dalai Lama? No, it just means you're being aware and mindful in your everyday life. And it allows you to become aware of the connection of your mind and body. It helps create awareness of the space between the stimulus and your response to it, and the freedom and distance from that stimulus. So this is the key to how it is useful in health behavior change. You never make a good decision in the moment. I say this all the time, right? It's over and over and over again. You've heard me say this. You never make a good decision in the moment. You're going to make a good decision when you're planning for the future. So when it comes to food or exercise or giving into alcohol or tobacco or getting frustrated, lashing out at a colleague or a child or something, if you can practice being aware of your body and your thoughts and practice being aware of how it feels to react, or even more so not to react, and then you can practice delaying your action, then you often end up making that better decision. And with practice, it becomes habit. And our habits are what make us and make our results, whether it's anxiety or anger or alcohol or food or weight or whatever it is. So let's get geeky again here. Again, we make those 700 new neurons a day, and the brain learns and adapts and restructures itself based on its history of thoughts and attitudes and emotional experiences, right? We talked about that. So we can retrain and reshape our brain and its emotional traits with conscious thought. Mindfulness can help us in this by linking experiences across time, so back then and now, in order to do this. And it allows our brain to activate those experiences kind of simultaneously and by themselves, meaning that your experience in this moment does not need to mimic one that happened in the past if you don't want it to. And that your experience this moment can be just that. And your experience next time doesn't have to mimic this one. When you're mindful and you're able to separate those, you can get at rewiring those thoughts for yourself much more clearly. So you can do all this yourself, right? By creating forced awareness initially and presence, and there's no judgment. This is really hard. You've got to fake it for a while. I call it fake it until you become it. And then doing it long enough that you've created a habit that's second nature. So there's also formal programs you can take on mindfulness, the mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. That's kind of the Kabat-Zinn style. They're all over the country. They've shown that 8 weeks of mindfulness training can increase the activation of the left prefrontal cortex, which is crazy. That's planning, personality, and happiness. It also has shown that it can increase gray matter in the hippocampus, which is learning and memory, and other structures that are actually associated with self-awareness, compassion, and introspection. It also can reduce the amygdala density, which is your emotional reaction to stress, and it connects the prefrontal problem-solving skills and the emotional modulation of the amygdala, which means that you're able to problem solve in the context of stress and emotion better. So there's studies that show all of this: well-being, emotional intelligence, overgeneralization, experiential avoidance. It works on rumination and worry and thought suppression. It helps with cognitive flexibility and mental coping and all of that. It actually even shows reversal and treatment of chronic disease. So all of those non-productive thoughts that you can get out of the way. So it's really astounding. So self-compassion leads to self-efficacy, which means that you're planning and your belief of yourself of what you can accomplish, and leads to an increase in mindfulness, which is recognizing where you are in space. All of that can happen by your own work. It's amazing. So we do this, we talk about this all the time in our coaching programs. I think it is absolutely essential. You cannot make change, whether it's on your weight or your food relationships, your exercise, or reversing and preventing chronic disease. You can't do this without this work on your own. But again, it's hard, and we're here to help you if you want to come join us in one of our transformational coaching programs. Last thing I wanted to talk about, because it is a mindset week and we can't not talk about addiction, right? People are not just addicted to booze, heroin, meth, although my nocturnal emergency medicine shifts sure feel like that's what it is. But basically addiction can be just thought of as the rewiring of our brains kind of based on the cultural convenience, right? So social media or Amazon bringing you something you ordered the next day, like just that easy reward. So it actually, those quick conveniences that we're all getting used to is causing sort of an addiction cycle in your brain about reward in the dopamine centers. And I've talked about this with food before and food addictions, and there's something on my blog, I think it's great, conversation about it on the blog. So go on over there to www.holisthealth.com/blog. But I wanted to bring it up today because I recently saw someone talk about addiction as the definition of a continued use of anything despite adverse circumstances. So that's really interesting because I'm going to say it again. It's the continued use of anything despite adverse consequences. So it's what you are using to buffer your life and emotion and circumstance, even though it's not serving you. It is giving you the dopamine